I'm just going to check with Stephanie. She's giving me the thumbs up, which is always a good sign. And our next session is to focus really on something that's important to all of us, which is international news. Our next guest is Alex Crawford. I'll let Peter Ettrup from TV2 Denmark introduce her properly. It's true to say that she's an old colleague, an old friend of mine, actually a very young colleague and a very young friend of mine, I should say, and someone that has covered the globe all around, all sorts of stories, usually in difficult places. And I think it's important for us all as international journalists to look at the challenges facing us in covering the world. And I couldn't think of a better person to do that with, but with Alex. I'll let Peter introduce her properly.
Hi, Alex.
Hi there.
Thank you for joining us today, and sorry about the short delay. We had a bit of technical problems. I hope
No
you can hear
problem.
us now.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Good. Just so you know, in the room here present are representatives from TV stations around the globe, all members of ENEX, and we also have colleagues joining us through the online system. But before I ask you the first question, I'll just give people a quick introduction to who you are. Alex Crawford is an Emmy and BAFTA winning special correspondent based in Istanbul. And through her impressive career at Sky News, she has become a journalistic superstar, not only in her native Britain, but throughout the world, because many of your stories have been featured in the ENEX network. And I believe that it's most likely that your stories have featured on all the channels represented in this room, including my own in Denmark. And while the rest of us are holding boring meetings about things like budget adjustments, she's out there making important stories from hotspots, including Syria and Afghanistan. In a moment, we'll see some clips from some of the iconic stories she's made. She's been arrested, detained, abducted, interrogated, and faced live bullets, tear gas, IEDs, and mortar shells. So first, let me ask you, Alex, why did you choose such a terrible job?
Well, I think it's the best job ever. I mean, I can't believe I haven't been found out yet. I took a long time to get to this job, though, as Adrian will tell you. I mean, I was turned down repeatedly, multiple times. And I mean, one of my former bosses, I've got quite a few former bosses, but one of my former bosses said, well, but they made you wait so that you were extra hungry by the time you got there. And I was definitely very, very hungry by the time I got there. I always wanted to, but be a foreign correspondent. And I just did a really, really, really long apprenticeship. So I only started it really about 15 years ago. But I've spent all my career sort of learning to try to get to that point. So I think it's the best job in the world. And I'm constantly encouraging other young journalists to take it up and think about it and do all the groundwork so that they can also experience this. Because I also think it's not only an extremely enjoyable job, it's incredibly fulfilling, satisfying. You feel like you can make a big difference on a small scale with individuals, on a big scale with government policies, on a worldwide scale, bringing things to people's attention. So that ticks all the boxes for me.
Good. I think now would be a good time to see a small clip reel of some of the stories that you've done over the years. Is it coming, or I think not, probably. So let me just ask you instead. If you look back at these last 15 years of your career, is there one story from abroad that really stuck with you in a special way?
I mean, there are many, many, many stories, and it's really difficult to categorize them in how they stick with you. Because also every story, the most recent story you do is the one that really sticks with you. And they all have character building instances and stories that you go through and experiences that you have. I mean, if you're under fire and you have a near-death experience in Libya, that's going to have a massive impact for many years to come. But I've just come back from Afghanistan, and I'm still dealing with, I've had 2 trips to Afghanistan recently, one in the weeks just before Kabul fell to Taliban, and then in the immediate weeks after they took over. And every day I'm still consumed with trying to get human rights defenders and journalists out, and getting bombarded with emails and texts and messages from people asking me to help them get out. People I've interviewed and people who've just heard I've helped other people get out, because in the scramble with the military evacuation, we got quite a few, we got all our fixers out who were working directly with us and their families. So in Afghanistan, they have extended families. So, you know, we were taking huge groups of people and managing to get them visa waivers onto the military flights. But then as soon as the military flights stopped, there were still tons of people. Every single person I interviewed was asking to, you know, so I went to a hospital, every single person in there wanted to get out, doctors, you know, medics, nurses. So at the moment, my head is filled with Afghanistan. Yesterday, I'm part of this group which awards human rights defenders and female activists. Yesterday it's called the Anna Politkovskaya Award in memory of the Russian journalist, which was killed 15 years ago. Yesterday, they awarded it to an Afghan female politician and activist. So at the moment, my head is just filled with Afghanistan, and at the moment, that is the story that's in my head. You know, walking across, it was so hard to get back into Afghanistan after the military evacuation. I flew first to Doha to try and get onto a Qatari flight into Kabul. That soon became apparent that was not going to happen for at least a week. So I then flew from Doha to Islamabad. We drove from Islamabad all the way down to Torkham border, which took 6 hours through the Khyber Pass, then arrived there, waited 4 hours at the border, begging and, sort of using every contact in the book to try and let us get over the border, because the guys that I was with didn't have the right papers. So they kept on saying, well, you can go, but on your own. You'd have to leave the crew, the medic that's come with you and everyone else behind. Then I crossed over. And as soon as we crossed over, the Taliban had taken control and I became invisible as a woman. You know, they greeted I was the only one who gave the traditional Arabic greeting of peace. They slapped the guys on the back and threw their arms around them and said, welcome to the new Taliban Afghanistan. And I was just blanked. They didn't even look at me. And right now in Afghanistan, they're operating in a atmosphere of, they don't just want women to cover themselves. I was wearing a full length dress, headscarf, being very deferential, not and submissive. They don't even just want that. They want women to disappear. So the next few weeks, we're all consumed with trying to highlight the humanitarian situation there and how women were immediately subjugated. They were all sent home. Everyone that had a job was sent home unless you were a health worker. And they're at home now. No, they were just beginning to come out when I was there. That was 3 weeks after they took over, but they were all wearing hijabs, niqabs, burqas. Obviously, many women like to, are happy to wear those anyway, but there are many, many more who don't want to and have lived the past 20 years being educated, and going abroad and getting education. So now things have rode back 20 years and there's quite a lot of desperation and fear. At the same time, the Taliban is smiling and welcoming female journalists like myself and wanting to show that they have changed, because they desperately need the humanitarian aid and the aid that they've relied on. 80% of their GDP is aid. So they have to try and be welcoming to foreign journalists like myself. It's a bit of a challenge for them though. And I think the key thing is getting across the story that it's it isn't changed. It might be superficially, you know, they're letting female journalists in like myself and many others. In fact, most of the reporters, many of the reporters were female, foreign journalists who came in, but they haven't changed at all. So at the moment, I would say that is the story that sticks out. But there have been such big stories that I've been lucky enough to be at the center of. Libya being one, obviously Syria is a massive one. And that's continuing to go on. It's gone on for at least 10 years. The whole of the Arab Spring was like life-changing for me. But I guess Libya was the one that had the most impact on me mentally, emotionally, and career-wise, perhaps.
It's actually a very good segment onto to the video that I'm now being told is ready to be played, because he will see some of the stories that you did from Afghanistan and from some of the other places like you just mentioned.
The departure of the bulk of the American and other NATO forces has emboldened them, and they smell victory. We're the first foreign journalists to see the latest army base the Taliban have captured in the province, and they want to show us the treasure trove of military riches they've seized with it. But they fear they'll be amongst the first to be banned by a Taliban regime. There's a new generation who've grown up with these small freedoms, and they want more, not less.
Feeling good, because if they come back to Afghanistan, so we have lost all of these rights to go out or even go out of home.
Now she's viewed as a spy and enemy collaborator by the Taliban, and her former US partners are leaving her to face the fighters alone.
I feel extremely abandoned. I'm in danger. It's not only that I am in danger, now my kids are in danger also. Because now, they came behind my door. They sent me, messages through the phone. They got in touch with me in many different ways. So it's the lives of my children and myself, both of us, so especially my kids at this point. They won't leave us. They won't leave me alive.
You can barely see her face, and it's too upsetting to show you. The flames took her eyelids, her nose, her lips, and her ears. And now she's in the fight of her life to stay alive, and not yet 2 years old. The Blitz appears designed to do just that, push people out, and they're now cornered in Idlib province with nowhere else to go.
Come through this way. There's somebody shooting at that vehicle on the road. They've got line of sight. Come this way. I know. It's a 20.
Well, this is how he's trying to stay in power. Then, remarkably, against considerable odds, they realize Gaddafi's men have retreated. They want the world to see the battle for Zawiya. They know Gaddafi will deny this, and he does, calling us liars. Children are mining the cobalt which could be in your smartphone. Dawson's threatened with a beating if he messes up again. The little boy with Richard, who's not much bigger, next to him, have worked all day already. They are 8 and 11 years old. This is what helpless looks like, and he's one of the children making millions for multinational corporations in America and China whilst they suffer in squalor.
The people here are praying quietly to themselves, sometimes together. They're putting a lot of hope into the driver who doesn't really know how to drive. She can hardly walk. Wait, carefully go. Wow, her arms. Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round. There are old people. There are babies. Many of them are talking about being here for over a month. Clearly not had very much to eat at all. A lot of them extremely thin and very frail.
Thank you for that, very powerful stuff here. As we could see, your stories often feature horrible images of desperation and death. I'm curious as to how you balance what to show and what not to show, because obviously you probably see a lot more death and destruction than the viewers do. But how do you balance showing the horrors of the world and still producing something that can be sent on television?
I mean, it's a question I'm constantly arguing with my editors about, because I definitely think people should see the guts and the gore, because I don't think there's any point in sanitizing it. It's not pretty and it's not nice, and most of the time you're dealing with evil people, evil politicians, evil decisions, or wrong decisions, and those wrong decisions have incredible consequences. So I think you should see it, and a lot of the time it's my editors who are curbing it. I mean, obviously you can't. There's a line that you've got to be very careful not to cross, but I think I dance very close to that line a lot of the time. I don't want to put people off completely from watching it, but I do want them to feel some of the hurt and feel some of the shame, or know some of the consequences. And if that means showing the ugliness of war, or the terror of kids, or the injustice of poverty, then I think you should see it.
You seem very much like a person who's very much driven by your own passion to tell these stories, and as you said, you're also personally involved with helping some of the people who are in Afghanistan now. But that's also something that could be debated, that fine line between being a neutral observer and being an activist. Is that something you're also focused on, to try and balance those two things?
I don't think I want to be known as an activist. I want to be known as a journalist, because that's what I am. But I think most journalists, the bulk of good journalists, are probably quite human too. They couldn't be good journalists without being good humans, and or being in touch, being empathetic. You've got to be able to feel things. You've got to be able to know the difference between a lie or a non-lie. You've got to be able to know the difference between spin and reality. And I don't think it is a journalist's job to sanitize the truth or the pictures. I think that the job of a journalist is to show it as it is, raw. And helping people is not a non-journalist thing to do. That's just a human thing to do. So
seeing all these horrible things that you've seen during your career, do you still, well, you're obviously very passionate about Afghanistan, but I've heard senior journalists talk about, like, you get a sense of numbness to some of it. I mean, if you've seen enough bodies, at some point, it's not really you're not touched in the same way anymore, but it doesn't seem like this has been a problem for you.
I think it's definitely something to watch out for. And actually, when Adrian was my foreign editor, he told me a long time ago, when I was just starting out on my first foreign correspondency job, he said, you've got to be careful to measure it. You get full up with this, and you've got to be careful and watch it. And I've tried to. I'd stay away from violence when I'm not actually confronted with it in my job. I try not to. I don't want to watch violent films. I don't want to watch violent series. My kids have been telling me to watch Squid Game and things, and how it's gone viral. I said, is it violent? I don't want to watch that stuff. But I see it a lot in my job, and I'm very aware and conscious of if I am getting numb to it. But I think quite the opposite. I think I'm getting much more emotional about it, and that's also an issue, because you have to sort of stay. You have to try and maintain a sense of calmness, and you have to be slightly removed, especially in the moment of when you're covering the story. You have to be able to, I think, and this is just a personal take, but I think you have to be able to feel it, because that helps you with your reactions. It helps you get you out of trouble for a start, and it helps you ask the right questions. But you also have to be aware of protecting yourself, physically and mentally and emotionally. And I'm very, very aware of all of that and the impact it's having on me. And I try and protect myself and my heart as much as possible. But I do realize I'm getting quite emotional, and that story, that question you asked about the difference between a journalist and an activist, I think it is a challenging one, and it is a controversial one. But I think, like, the journalists who have covered Afghanistan, if we take Afghanistan for instance, they had a mass evacuation. They had this string of events which led up to this catastrophic immediate pullout, and mass panic amongst people, and countries were evacuating people out of it. Now, we have a duty, I think, to help our fellow journalists. That's not activism, that's helping our fellow journalists, who are all now targets. And the people that I interviewed suddenly had a great big target on their chest and their faces because I had interviewed them. I'd interviewed female activists and human rights offenders. You saw them in that clip, who were already targets before the Taliban arrived, who had already been threatened by them. I put them on air as part of the process of telling the story and highlighting how dangerous it is if the Taliban come into town. That target doesn't go away after the broadcast ends. And I feel our responsibility as fellow journalists and humans doesn't disappear either. So if I can, by dint of my job, by the fact that I work for a large organization, by the fact that I live and have a passport belonging to a rich country, if I can help them, help the journalists and the human rights defenders and the female activists who are now who are running from house to house and desperately trying to stay alive, then I don't think that's activism. I think that's actually a duty that we all have. I mean, these people wouldn't even be on the telly if I hadn't reported on them. They wouldn't be have targets on their head if the reports hadn't appeared across all the ENEX partners. Do you see what I mean? So we all have a responsibility for this. And I know it's a controversial question and people continually ask it, but I don't really see there's a challenge there. I don't really see there's a controversy there. I think that's just what we should be doing.
You've chosen a career in journalism to do a certain kind of story. You could have chosen to cover local sporting events or the weather, or basically anything not as touchy and not as dramatic as what you do. But I mean, doesn't it get depressing sometimes that you're always traveling to the places where everyone else is trying to leave?
It's definitely can be very, very depressing. But I didn't choose it. And I'm quite wary of people who are 20 and just starting out who say they want to be a war correspondent, because I never wanted to be a war correspondent. That would be crazy. To me, that sounds crazy. But I was covering events I wanted to be a foreign correspondent and work in the field in different countries. I was brought up in Africa, and it didn't feel, it just felt those were where the stories were and what I wanted to report on. I fell into hostile environments, and then by continually experiencing them, I was amassing this experience and realized that I was in a position, like a lot of my other colleagues who do it repetitively, of we knew our way around them. We knew how to operate. We were quite highly trained and skilled in coping with them. And then when they start to have an impact, or they start to have they start to change things, it feels like you realize you're in quite a special position to be able to go to these areas where politicians can't go to, diplomats can't go to, aid workers can't even go to. But somehow, journalists who are determined to get there and can somehow find a way to get there. So no one could get to Myanmar And me and my team, because I never do it on my own, I've got this huge backup with a lot of very, very experienced, good, loyal co-workers who come with me, and we worked really hard to get over to Myanmar. And we were the only people who managed to do that, the only people apart from the Reuters journalists who were then arrested and put in prison for it, who managed to get independent evidence of what the Myanmar military were doing to the Rohingya, and that evidence is now being used in an international criminal court case against them. So it feels like the work is quite important, and we can get to places that other people can't get to, and that means foreign journalists or journalists generally, inside or outside every country. Sometimes it's often easier for foreign journalists to go into a country because then they can then leave, and it's fantastically difficult for, say, journalists in Myanmar to report. And they're still doing it, but it's incredibly difficult for them. They're taking such massive risks. So we sort of have to dovetail with them, and we can provide a different, but I would say pretty essential service, so a sort of eye, a fresh eye on what's going on and showing these atrocities. And the ideal is to be able to get in there and to be able to get out there safely and somehow, nail the lies that various governments are perpetuating, or show the truth as the flip side. So I think we've seen the two journos today getting the Nobel Peace Prize in countries that are incredibly difficult to operate in and being hounded for it. And I think journalism and journalists in various different parts of the world, and very subtly creep in areas and countries that we consider democratic, such as Britain and America, everything, we're all really feeling the cosh, I think. And so it's a great boost to have two journalists from Philippines and Russia to be given the Nobel Peace Prize. I think it highlights the very real dangers that journalists are facing all across the world.
I think unfortunately time is running out, but I would like to ask you, maybe it's a bit of a philosophical question, but I know many people in this room and watching from via Zoom are making decisions about where to send reporters on a daily basis, whether we want to cover Afghanistan or a different country or a third country. And we sometimes get criticized for only chasing the bad stories. I mean, child mortality is down worldwide, poverty is down worldwide, more and more girls are going to school, and we are still, at least the critics say, sending out a picture of a world where things are going in the wrong direction generally. Do you think we as media organizations are good enough at balancing, all the bad stuff that's happening in the world, but also the good stuff?
You see, I think we should be highlighting much more of the bad stuff. I'm not sure I'm the right person to respond to that question, because I think there are many, many, many more atrocities and injustices and things going on that aren't being covered right now, and which need to be covered. Afghanistan, people have pulled out of Afghanistan now, and the next few weeks are going to be and months are going to be absolutely fundamental. What's happening in Nigeria, what's happening in Mali, the poverty and the stresses and strains because of climate change across sub-Saharan Africa. What's happening in Iraq, the Yazidis, trying to find justice for the Yazidi women, the ISIS regrowth across huge 7 different countries in Africa. All of these are really important stories, and I don't think we should be stopping from covering them just because they're bad news stories. They're really, really important. They will have an impact on all of us and all of our countries. And whilst there might be less child poverty in some countries, that's great, and more girls going to school in some countries, that's also great. There are many other countries where women and girls are very subjugated and they're losing their rights like a tide going out. So I think we should be covering more of that and splashing out more money on covering more countries. Oops. I think you've lost me, haven't you?
We on Zoom hear you. Thank you.
Okay, okay. I've got a message saying sorry, we can't hear you.
Yes,
At least you can.
But we do. And
What do you guys think?
This was fantastic. Okay.
We think a lot of things, Alex, but we lost your connection here. So we could hear you, but we couldn't hear you on the big screen. Thank you very much for sparing the time and joining us.
Thanks for asking, Adrian.
Okay, all the best.